Hello everyone. Today we're doing this special episode. Now that I'm alone and I'm doing this podcast, we have someone special, and this is our a new edition of the Diffr podcast, and we have someone very special from Serbia. Am I right?
Yep,
Yep. This is
correct.
Bogdan. Hello, Bogdan, and he has this startup called Tenderly. What they do is they have this blockchain-based service. What they provide is monitoring, altering, and troubleshooting for your Ethereum-based decentralized app. And what they do is they provide you solution to provide you services that can help you with your decentralized apps that is based on Ethereum mostly, right?
Yep,
And
precisely.
can you explain a little bit? Because I'm not an expert in blockchain technology and I'm not an expert in decentralized apps at any given second. Can you explain to me and our viewers what's it about and what your service is about?
Okay, so first things first, I think a bunch of people heard about blockchain. So most people heard about it through a cryptocurrency called Bitcoin, and it's a nice way to think about finance because you kind of have this whole decentralized system where value is passed, where you have no like central authority like a bank or a government or whatever. And then then came Ethereum, which is called like blockchain 2.0, where other than I can send you money, now I can execute these applications, programs in a decentralized way, where I say, for example, I want to pay, I don't know, let's say 1 Ether for this to happen, and then all of the computers in the world that participate in the network actually do that. And it's really interesting because then you can get use cases like, I don't know, liquid democracy, where I, for example, really trust you and I don't want to vote, so I could give my vote to you, for example, and nobody can tamper with that. And there's some really cool use cases. And I'm coming from, they call it here Web 2.0 technologies. It's like traditional development. So there I was used to having a lot of tooling that helped me while programming. And then when I started with my friends building out Tenderly, which originally wasn't this what it is, we actually made decentralized tenders, which is where a government, for example, wants to buy 100 shares, and then they have to procure those shares, and there's like this huge auction, and we started building that out on the blockchain. But it was really hard because there was no tooling at all. And then we started making like internal tools for us to help us develop, and then we discovered that we have much more fun and enjoy it much more to build the tooling and not the app itself. So that's how Tenderly came to be. So in a nutshell, when people are digging, we pass them the shovels more or less. Where the people are programmers and we're the ones giving the service.
Okay, so what's the situation in Serbia when it's with regards to blockchain technology and cryptocurrency? Because Ethereum in itself is based on blockchain technology, but it also takes in use of cryptocurrency, which is Ethereum. And I know a little bit about the gas module. You have to pay a little bit of gas to run your programs and run your decentralized app. Can you explain the difference and like the fine subtleties about Ethereum and what you're working on?
Okay, so as you said, you have Ethereum like the blockchain, and then you have Ethereum, the currency itself. Most people think that cryptocurrency and blockchain is the same thing. It actually isn't. So basically, blockchain is a technology. It's called like a distributed ledger. How you can think about it is like if when you go to a bank and I send you money, for example, a person in the bank would write down the transaction in a notebook, and that cannot be like in an ideal world that cannot be deleted in any way. And blockchain is more or less that. Only everyone, like let's imagine every banker in the world needs to write it down in their notebook, and everybody validates if that's actually written down. So that's blockchain. And then when you have a system like that, currencies like uh, me sending you money, or I don't know, having my house mortgage taken there, like for Ethereum from any other part of the world, makes a lot of sense to do it in that way. So that's the difference of like making a currency. And we can say this, for example, Facebook announced Libra, which is their own cryptocurrency. Again, they have Libra, the cryptocurrency, and then Libra, the blockchain itself. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And then what we're building out is like all of this infrastructure so people can actually see what's happening on the blockchain itself, so not the cryptocurrency. So that's kind of what we do. And also you asked what's the situation about cryptocurrencies in Serbia?
Hmm. Yes,
Now
that was part
that
of the
should
question as
pass
well.
where cryptocurrencies will be legalized. as in, it's a really strange point right now because we have crypto ATMs around Serbia, and it's kind of a gray zone because it's one of those things like if there isn't a law, it's probably okay to do it. So we have crypto ATMs, but you cannot spend the crypto like in any store here. That, and also there's a lot of blockchain developers. There's this study that I think we're like the fifth or fourth country that has the most blockchain developers per capita in the world. So blockchain is really gaining like a lot of traction here.
Oh, okay. If there was a individual in Nepal who would want to work in blockchain technology, they would have all the opportunities in the world. But when it comes to using your service, and I know for a fact I read through your Medium article where it says you can look through the source code and you can find which line of the code it says that allows you to find out the error in your smart contracts. So that
Yeah.
way you're trying to find out the errors, you're trying to render different scenarios, and then you're trying to troubleshoot. So that's a very important thing for people out there because most people don't know how to program in Solidity. I tried myself like in the past year or so trying to understand the whole programming language, if I can call it, and then whole structure. I went to the Ethereum's website and they have a lot of database out there and a lot of knowledge, but still I did not understand it a lot, and I left it for the experts because you can try to learn, but then you have to accept the inevitable. So what I meant to ask with all of this is whenever there's a certain kind of technology that's disrupting the market, because this would eventually make the banks obsolete in a case. This would make governments obsolete because there would be a supercomputer an AI ideally that could churn out all the decision made by votes in the public, like you said. When you see all of this, that poses a lot of risk to the people that have powers, the powers that be. How do we, as programmers, as startup enthusiasts and entrepreneurs, navigate through these waters? How do we succeed when there are problems in terms of financial regulations and infrastructure built? What's your take on that?
Well, this is my personal opinion. The first thing is that you probably cannot take down those people, let's say, because they have been there for thousands of years, more or less.
And
So it's
let
the
me
same thing
clarify,
like
I'm not trying to start something like that.
no,
Just
no,
my
no,
question.
no. No, of course, but it's an interesting topic to discuss, more or less. So,
Mhm.
the thing is, so you had more or less the same thing with internet when it started. It also started like a very decentralized thing where you had to run your own server to get out online. You couldn't just like connect to somewhere.
Mhm.
It kind of started in the same way, and people I think ask more or less the same questions. So, for example, okay, so if I upload something there, it's gonna stay there forever, and now we
Mhm.
have all of this censorship going on, like in China or other countries.
Even
So even
ours.
though it's yeah, I think it's in every country more or less. It's just
Yeah.
if it's discussed or not. But the thing is, basically, that you had like this whole same thing happen with the internet where people had like so much hopes for it to do everything ever. And I think we have the same thing with blockchain right now, that it's
Mhm.
gonna, I don't know, cure cancer, solve world hunger and everything else. It probably won't, but it will probably change our lives like in the internet did like a lot.
Mhm. So that's our perspective right here, and there's this really nice little startup called Moonlit Studios, and they have this really nice decentralized app. I talked to you about this, uh,
Hmm.
and I'm going to talk about where we talked about this in the next segment. And they have this decentralized app that helps you store your bookmarks. Now, uh, can you explain to us why that is such a big deal and why that is such a nice way to ensure privacy? Why bookmarks and your data, how blockchain helps you secure your privacy? Can you dive into a little bit of that?
Yeah. So there's two parts to that. First, you have the privacy part, and then you have the self-sovereignty part, which is, and I'm going to cover that one first. So when you say they do decentralized bookmarks, the thing is there are bookmark services like I don't know. I use Instapaper. There's things like Pocket, for example. The thing is, if I store my bookmarks there, the first thing is that they can sell the data to advertisers, and then I can be targeted more. That's like the first privacy part. But the more interesting thing for me is because if something's free for me, I'm kind of okay for them to sell my information because I'm getting something in return. If I don't like the service, I'm not going to use it. So it's kind of a fair trade if you make the decision consciously, at least. But another part of it is, for example, if tomorrow Instapaper gets shut down, I'm going to lose all of my bookmarks,
Mm-hmm.
and I will have no way of getting them back. So that's the self-sovereignty part. If it's stored in a decentralized way, it's going to be there forever,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like the really important part. And then there's also the privacy aspect that I do pay a bit for the bookmark to be saved. For example, on Ethereum, I pay that price only once, but it's gonna stay there forever, and nobody except me can read it. So that's kind of the benefit.
So when you mention something like if the app itself crashes in a non-blockchain, non-decentralized system, if the app crashes, you lose all your data and then you lose all the value it created. Same thing with Facebook. Like tomorrow, if Facebook, since Facebook is not in the blockchain, and if Mark Zuckerberg decides to like, let's just close this thing and I want to go to Hawaii and spend my life there. People are going to lose that data, and because we've already submitted so much of our system, I don't think that's going to ever happen. But then that's the
Yeah.
case, and I like to post a similar situation, what's happening in Venezuela, because like their whole government and then whole money and value system has crashed, and I see all these pictures of all these people in Venezuela throwing away their money. The toilet paper is worth more than the currency it's printed on, and all of those situations that are happening because the decentralized systems do not exist. All the federal banks and all the central banks, they're controlling these markets and they're controlling these interest rates. And regardless of what kind of consensus you have, you do not have a consensus because there's only a certain set of people that are controlling these data. Now, when you have blockchain technology, coins like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and there's a bunch of others out there that are controlled by the consensus of the market, that are controlled by a ledger that is equal, that's same throughout the internet, throughout the world. How does that help government? Why should the government import that into their already existing money system? What's your take on that?
So there has been talks here, for example, in Serbia, when you have I don't remember, I don't know, I'm not sure how you say it in English, when the government does like an official listing of all the people in the country, where it's like how many people that see themselves as males are there in the
Survey,
country, how
a
many
census.
females. Yeah. So, for example, that, or for example, how many people have only high school education or whatever. They actually wanted to do that on the blockchain itself, and that's kind of something. I mean, they didn't in the end, but at least there was some hopes of them doing it. So basically, how I see that is that, as you said, blockchain can work with the government itself. I think there's this huge problem where you have like all of these blockchain supremacists, where they're like, this is going to tear down all the governments, all the banks, everything else. I'm more of a person where it's like, okay, let's see, for example, if instead of using Swift or even better Western Union, if I'm sending money back home, I want to use a cryptocurrency because it's going to happen like in 4 seconds. It's going to be there almost instantly. It's going to be much cheaper. And of
Mhm.
course, there's a lot of people in power that don't want that to happen. But if you had enough people empowered to use that technology to their advantage, as in both from a I don't know society perspective and their own gain, I think that the society in general can gain much more. So as you said, for example, from Venezuela, there was also, I think, were they the ones that had like voting done on the blockchain? I can't remember though. A couple
I
of years
think
back, I
the Petro, that was their blog. They did want to implement the Petro, which was
yeah.
backed by the government based on the petroleum value of their country. But
Mhm.
then there was a whole issue
Yeah.
regarding the corruption scandal. There's two sides to it all, and
Mhm.
I don't want to get into the politics. But
Yeah, of
basically,
course.
what I'm trying to say is the worst case scenario was the banks would fail and the money would not be valued at that much. Now, I also want to talk about the we talked so much about the promise of blockchain, the promise of cryptocurrency. I also want to talk about the dark side of it, because you guys are working on the light side, and you guys are working on with people that are actually trying to do good in the world. You're trying to create smart contracts and trying to minimize the errors in the smart contract. That's your business. And then when you do that, when you're trying to solve problems for all these creators, what sort of innovating solutions have you seen, like in the market, that that are trying to adopt your service? Like, for example, what sort of problems are you trying? Are you have you seen that are solved that you did not even figure out? Like, oh my God, I didn't even think our service could solve this kind of a problem after you developed it.
hmm okay, just to see if I understood the question correctly, do you mean like problems that were solved with our tool that we didn't foresee, or do you mean
Yeah, yeah, something like
that
you didn't
decentralized?
foresee it.
Aha, okay. So one of the things is that we started, I mean, we still kind of are like a development tooling company, a debugging company, or monitoring company, however you're going to say it. But we were targeting developers first, as we are developers ourselves. And then we saw in Paris in March of this year, actually, a bunch of business people taking interest who are non-technical at all, seeing that they can use that information to do like get a competitive advantage over their competitors. That's one of those things. For example, we have an alerting feature that we're probably going to release in the next couple of days, and then we previewed that last year in Berlin. Actually, we won an award for it, and again, a bunch of non-technical people came in. Oh, I want to get notified when something happens because it can help me in an X, Y, and Z way. Which we were like, wow, okay, you can actually use it in that way. So it's kind of nice to hear it getting used on a non-purposeful way, at least from our side, but still helping people.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful thing about being a startup. You get to iterate so many times, and then you get to figure out so many different features from your users itself. I also want to talk about a little bit about the finances side, because that's a very important issue for the people that I represent from Nepal. Mm, because raising money, raising funding, especially when you're trying to create something innovative, is really hard. Would you mind like discussing like how much did you put, or you don't even have to go to the exact numbers or figures, but if you've raised any money and then if you've gotten any awards, how does that go for you? What's your journey been like in that phase?
Okay, so I need to give some context. First, we started doing this part time because it was a combination of two or three hackathon ideas, and then we just started building it out in our own free time. And all of us, there's five of us, and we had a full time job.
Hmm.
And then a couple of months back, we had a discussion that we really believe in this idea, and that we definitely cannot build it out only as a hobby, more or less. And then if we truly believe this will succeed, all actually quit their full at big tech companies. So, and then we started doing this in our own time, in full time. And then, as you said, like for funding right now, we're bootstrapped, as in we actually invested our own money, our own savings into this because we truly believe it will work. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is that we also won a lot of hackathon prizes. We're huge supporters of hackathons, so we funded indefinitely as well. We got a lot of grants, both from our country and then from companies like Binance, for example, one of the biggest crypto exchanges in the world. So grants for no percentage, where we get money to continue developing this because they also believe that this is the future. So that's kind of good thumbs up from them. And
Hmm.
also right now we're in the middle of closing our seed round as well in a normal VC way, because even though that we're doing all of this, we will have much more focus when we know we have, for example, 2 years of runway and don't have to think about money, and we can focus solely on the product itself.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful thing when you are trying to figure this out, and then you're trying to understand like what investors want, what are their intentions, especially, and what do they bring to the table. And whenever you're trying to talk to these investors, what's like the first thing of value that you look? Is it the money they bring to the table? Is the intention, or is the value they provide in terms of networking, or the hands they shake? Out of those three things, which one would you rank where, if you had to rank them one, two, and three?
I think it's so all three of them are really important, definitely. That I mean, the ideal case is all three of them being really good.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I myself personally think that it's much more important to have somebody that can support you and that they feel the incentive to help you, because if you succeed, they will succeed as well. So that's, I think, much more important than money, more or less. But
Mhm.
also there's, I mean, you need to keep the lights on, so the money is important as well. But I guess like connection slash knowledge of how they can help you. So for example, in our case, going to an investor who is like a VC for medical technology would make literally no sense, because in that case they can only give us the money, and that's it. They cannot help us in any other way. That makes no sense. But going to an investor, for example, who has also invested in some blockchain companies so far, and they, I don't know, have some fintech background, and they also are networked in a really good way where they know people working on blockchain projects, for example, enterprise clients, whatever. That makes much more sense. And then even taking less money than the medtech one makes more sense, because you get much more of that intrinsic value from their connections and their prior knowledge than the money itself.
Yeah, it's a more bang for your buck kind of a thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, what do your teammates or your co-founders, what do they think about this whole process? Like, how did you guys start? Like, did you guys start in a dorm room where you were just talking about cryptocurrency, or where you were already working out in the field and you met through hackathons, or it's more like we grew up together and we were riding bicycles one day and then we just found this weird thing called blockchain, and that's how we started. How was the journey?
So there's two parts to it. First thing, we were all friends before. So I mean, right next to me sits my best friend of 14 years. So that's a lot of time. And we all started also. We everybody knows everyone else from high school at least,
Mm-hmm.
and we are all developers. That's how it all started. Then we, at some point, almost all of us worked at the same company as well. And then Nebusha, our one of our friends who worked with us, he started getting interested in Ethereum a lot, and cryptocurrencies in general, and decentralization, blockchain. And he started actually persuading us. And first, we were really hard egg to crack, more or less, because we were like, why would you do it in this way? Why would you do it in that way? And then we saw like a bunch of these breaches in big companies, a bunch of economies falling apart and everything else. And more that happened, more and more, it actually made sense to us that this actually might be the future. Maybe not the utopian one where they say that everything's on the blockchain, but at least like some parts of it would be great. And then we started working, a couple of us started working actually in a blockchain consultancy firm, started working on decentralized projects there. And then we also went to hackathons, and that's kind of how we all got together. And I don't know, I think it's the combination of love for technology, but also really big motivator. For example, Lukash is really important to him as well. And blockchain is, other than the internet, the first and only technology that has society kind of built into it, more or less, because
Mm-hmm.
it's decentralized. So it was kind of a natural fit for all five of us.
Yeah, that seems like such a nice thing. Now, I want to ask you a little bit about your company's name, because that's very interesting, because it's named Tenderly. Is it because you
Mhm.
provide tender care to your decentralized apps? So is that was a sort of a route you're trying to go, or well, how did you come up with the name? Because I've been talking to all these founders over here, and they say, yeah, it took me a while to get this name down. It's the brand and everything. So how did you like switch to that name?
Okay, so we actually came up with the name in 5 minutes, but it was for a different project. As I said, first we did public procurement, and in Serbia, and in English as well, but it's not that much used. And it kind of was a fun pun for us to have at the hackathon, where we called the project Tenderly, because you have tenders and everything has a L and Y at the end if it's a startup. And it was funny. We also bought like the domain name tenderly.love. It was really funny to us. And then we did like tenders and everything else, and we got contacted for example, for government technology pioneers in Vienna, which is like this huge GovTech event. And then it was like, okay, so I guess we're Tenderly. And then when we discovered that we actually want to do blockchain tooling, it kind of stuck with us, and we kind of see it as a nice play on words. The first thing that you said, like Tenderly care, but then everything else is, for example, if you use our command line tool, the commands read tenderly login, tenderly push, tenderly log out, which is kind of, I don't know, it's fun for us, and it's kind of
It's
positive.
calming,
And
it's
yeah,
soothing, and it puts you at ease. That's what you want in
yeah, yeah,
finance. business, you want the
Yeah,
customer, the user to be at ease. So I think it
yeah,
worked out for you guys, right?
yeah.
And I want to talk about a little bit about how we got introduced and how we got
Mhm.
got to know each other. So both of us are participating in this nice little online course called Startup School, and it's started with from the Y Combinator. It's one of the biggest. Is it the biggest accelerator slash incubator in the world?
It's definitely one of the biggest. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
it's the one because I know they measure it in money, so I'm not sure in that way. But it's definitely the one that most startups want to get in. So
Yeah, yeah, it's the one that has like the most successful ones. Like few to
mhm.
name are like Dropbox, Airbnb. If I say those two names, most people want Twitch as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and then we were placed in this group and we had this nice little group discussion. And then Bogdan was really nice enough to answer all my questions there. And then he was really nice enough to reply me back saying that they were interested in doing a podcast. And then at that time, we really talked with each other and was more about sharing information with each other. And he was really interested about the blockchain scene in Nepal. And to all our viewers out here from Nepal and all over the world, he is always willing to help everyone over here. And then I talked to him about this really nice uh, institution here called Moonlit Studios. Shout out to Ayush Subedi and everyone that's they are also participating in the startup school. And I met this awesome individual. He used to be the CTO of like a variant, something like an Uber in Nepal called Tudo. And then he left to start this his own company, and I really like his approach. I met this dude once, and in this one meeting, I got to know what sort of an individual he is, and then that gave me a lot of perspective into trying to understand the minds of everyone who's working in tech industry, especially IT sector. Because why I have love for blockchain, especially, is because I, as a mechanical engineer, I'm always looking towards my end goal has always been like working in the space industry. And whenever you're trying to work in the space industry, the whole concept of money changes if you're trying to live in Mars. So how do you quantify money? You quantify money based on the work people do. So if you put value into building of civilization in Mars, the only way I can see right now, I don't know if there's going to be a new technology you could quantify in terms of blockchain. Like how does that affect the whole plan of putting humans there? And if you had to pay people, I think blockchain would be the right way to go. What are your thoughts on that? I just wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I
We're
imagine
going
people.
hypothetical here.
Yeah, yeah, of course. No, but it would be really funny, like seeing people packing like huge packets of US dollar bills,
Yeah.
handing them out. It would make kind of no sense. But yeah, I think it would be really important more and more, especially for example, you don't have to go as far as Mars. You can go, for example, to Africa because there's like all of this infrastructure that's not built out there for financial institutions and everything else. And the one thing blockchain is really good with is consensus, as in the majority of people coming to the same conclusion or actually agreeing that something did happen. So if we go that far in advance in the future, it would definitely make a lot of sense. As in, you cannot from here see if somebody actually like had a transfer of value, like a bill from one hand to another. But if you had like this huge ledger, it would definitely be possible. So I think when you look at it that way, it would be a great fit.
Yeah, it's like when you let these non-tech people come up with these weird ideas, this is what happens, we start going
Yeah.
into hypotheticals. It's very interesting that you mentioned Africa and the lack of financial institutions there, because Nepal is in a similar situation where we just are getting used to e-commerce sites, and we're just getting used to the fact that there's e-wallets. There's this biggest e-wallet called eSewa. Shout out to those people. And there's this other one called IME Pay. There's Kalti. There's a bunch of these people, like they're just popping up left and right. And the government is trying to rein them in and saying, okay, you need to have 200 crore. That's about $20 million in the bank to say that, okay, I'm about to run this technology. I don't know if there's the exact amount of money, but you need to have certain amount of money in the bank to secure service um, rights. And if you were, and I talked to you about the biggest telecommunications, mobile telecommunications platform here, Nepal Telecom, he knows about this, trying to launch their own digital wallet. If you were to give them suggestion, and if you were to say maybe pitch an idea about come to work for them, what sort of infrastructure would you start from scratch if something hasn't been built already? If you were to build it on the blockchain platform?
So a lot of enterprises, because basically telcos are enterprises and banks as well and everything else, people usually either go for a technology from IBM called Hyperledger. So that's like the a lot of people build on top of that. So that's probably one type of infrastructure. But we also saw some companies actually, some banks actually doing pilot programs with Ethereum itself, but not the main network, but they have like their own private network, which is Ethereum based as well. So I guess one of those two would definitely be if they did like an e-wallet. It would make most sense, I think.
Yeah, and then if you were to say they're trying to rein in different banks and they're trying to merge them together, when you're trying to build these infrastructures, I see a lot of people just like they're outright banning certain services. And then we talked to a little bit of bunch of blockchain enthusiasts here, and they were really concerned for the fact that they could not work in this field because there was not a lot of incentive. Now, when you were working, especially with Tenderly, I think you do, when in terms of payment service, you do accept like Ethereum coins and Ethereum, the cryptocurrency, right?
So right now we actually don't charge, as in we're still in beta.
Mhm.
That's the thing, but it would make a lot of sense if we're doing something for the blockchain to accept cryptocurrencies as well.
Yeah. So when they're building these blockchains, it doesn't make sense that they can't take those payments, and those restrictions are put in by the government here. And I understand if we can dive in a little bit over the dark side of the cryptocurrency too. The government banned these cryptocurrencies here because of the reason Nepali citizens are not allowed to take their money outside of the country. That's it's for some reason without the consent of the government, because Nepal is classified as a really developing country, and then if you take in money outside, the GDP of the country is not going to grow. And most of these people, when Bitcoin was really high, they converted all their white money, black money, whatever. That's what they said, and then they converted into Bitcoin, and then converted it back, and then that was sort of a money laundering scheme. And so they were trying to stop this kind of thing. When you're trying to balance these things out as a developer, what sort of an environment are you looking for? I'm asking you this because you work in a country where it's accepted and it's kind of murky at the time. That's what you
Yeah,
said last.
yeah, yeah.
So
It's kind of
how do you trade these waters? How do you tell developers here to unite and they put their case in front of the government? How did that whole process go in Serbia, and how can that be replicated here?
so. I know people when they have like a lot of money in crypto, a lot of people actually fly out to Switzerland or Portugal to
Mm.
take the money because, as I said, it's kind of a gray area, as in it's not forbidden, but it's also not accepted in a way. So people don't want to risk it. That's one of the things. But for example, if you don't have if you don't have a lot of money in crypto, you can pull it into your private account and nobody's gonna ask any questions because it's not a lot of money. But I know here there was a bunch of companies that did ICOs, for example, which is like for people that don't know, is an initial coin offering. So
ICO.
something similar, ICO, yeah. So it's similar like when a normal company goes public and they do like a public offering where people can buy their stock. Here it's the same thing. People usually to fund their project, they say, okay, so we will accept our own cryptocurrency. You can buy it in advance and at a better price than later, and then they use that money to fund the project. And then there was a couple of successful ICOs in Serbia, and then government took notice because like governments usually take notice when there's a lot of money floating around, and then they said, okay, we want to pay tax on this because they literally couldn't. So for example, if you let's get a fictional amount, $10 million, for example, in an ICO, you literally couldn't transfer it into our own currency here, that amount of money, because for the government would like literally appear from thin air, which is
Mhm.
literally tax evasion, money laundering, everything else. And then they were like, okay, so we want to do our development here. We want to spend the money here. give us the way to do it, and then government taking, for example, in Serbia, 20%, which is the tax here. They were, of course, interested in like giving a helping hand because they people can spend that money here. So that kind of, I guess, if there's enough value at the beginning, and this is the hard part because there has to be some people, some champions in Nepal that will kind of sacrifice a part of their life, as in they will use up their time to build something really valuable, and the country will see that as valuable, and they will want a piece of that. And to have a piece of that, they have to help out the community. So it's kind of then an equal trade. So definitely Moonlit, I guess, is one of those companies that if they do succeed, they can be the ones that come to the government and say, okay, we don't want to go out of Nepal. We want to be here so Nepal can grow. And then let's see how we can solve this problem together. And then I guess that's the correct way to have this conversation.
Yeah, and then I really think that since the median age is 22, and then this another shout out to Rashik Adhikari. He is also one of my like mentors. Let's say he's one of the few people who has given me a little bit of time into understanding and giving me a little bit of mentorship here. And then he talks a lot about this. The median age of Nepali people right now is 22. So since the median age is 22, there's a lot of people out there. That are ready to enter the workforce. And since they're already ready to enter the workforce, the biggest export we have is our youth. Our country's economy is sustained by remittance, the money that comes from outside in. And the biggest source of income you can have in any country is software development. You don't need a lot of infrastructure to build on that. You can already have all these internet connections. You can build data centers, and then you can have all these people coming in and then building new things and making value out of thin air. And then whenever you have blockchain or companies like that, you need to have people come in and start doing these things. And yes, there are definitely champions like that. And like I mentioned, Moonlit Studios, and there's Isatya, there's a bunch of other people, blockchain people that are actually trying to do some work. And then there's also VCs out here. There's this giant VC. If you ever wanted to expand into Nepal or any outside, and these VCs are located from outside of the world, and they can invest outside. So if you are ever looking into really good investors into developing markets, there's this VC called Dolma Impact Fund. There's this another VC called Movers and Shakers. There's another VC from this billionaire from our country, like the first official billionaire called Chowdhury Group, CG. And these are all pioneers, and they're trying to help and push everything. And then every time I talk to like the CEOs and listen to all these talks, and they're always so promising, and they're never talking about all the past things. We had a civil war like almost 10 12 years ago, and then we had a king, and then there was a democracy, and then we turned into this republic, and then now we're a federal state, and all these things are going on. And at this time, I really feel that people like you from the outside in, who have experts, like if we listen to you and then we get a lot of knowledge from you, it could help us. And I'd also like to thank your help. Like you taught me a lot, and talking about Binance and talking about all these people out there, and you've given me the biggest piece of advice I think about this company than nobody else has. And talking about evangelism, was that you who talked about being a business evangelist? And that's what I put into my bio now. And I understand that. Now let's head out a little bit into how you're going to build your company. And if you were to ever hire, let's say we're going on a hypothetical, if you were to outsource any of your workforce and say you wanted to hire any blockchain enthusiasts or developers out there, and if the price was cheaper, labor force was cheaper, which is in Nepal, by the way, what kind of talent would you look for? What kind of people would you hire? Like, what kind of skills do they need to have so that you might want to hire them and build?
Okay, so I think there's the thing that we all here believe. It doesn't matter from where you come; it's what you know. I think that that's the most important thing. And then, for example, I think to start a company, it's really hard to start remote. That's, I mean, why all five of us are sitting in the same room every day and doing the work together. But afterwards, it doesn't even matter if it's, I don't know, Nepal or China or the US or whatever. It really is the value that that individual himself brings, because it's not the value a value of an individual. So, for example, Serbia is also a country that does like a lot of outsourcing. Like a lot of it, we don't have that much product companies here that they're doing their own like startup. We are more like a service country for IT, more or less. People, so there's other countries that that are cheaper than us, for example, but people don't hire from those countries, but from here, because the people are really qualified to do their work. Because it's not it's not being cheap isn't a quality. It's a really good thing for the employer, I guess, but it's not a quality per se. So
Mm.
definitely with the internet, you guys like have this huge opportunity to learn a lot, to get qualified, even though, for example, I know a lot of people here in Serbia are self-taught and they're really good programmers as well. So definitely using that opportunity, which is the internet, and to learn all of that, and then like get to initial customers. Because if you guys are cheaper, of course, a lot of employers are going to come there. But then when a lot of employers are there, then you can, and if they see the quality, nobody's going to say anything, and that's how at least how I would build an economy, even though I'm a developer, not an economist. So take this with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking about hypothetical, and we can only talk about our industry ourselves. And if I
Yeah.
were to ever talk to anybody about like founding a company, it would be based on what everybody I interview talks about. My knowledge base is as good as the people I talk to and the books I read. And if you were to ever suggest anybody to read a book, you gave me a few books to read, and then I read a few of those books. What books or what tutorials would you ask them to follow if anybody wants to start learning blockchain technology? Like, what are the courses they could go? I'll put the link of the your GitHub right there. I put the link of the GitHub for Ethereum as well. For the newbies out there, I know there's a lot of people already working on it. From the US or Australia, even here, there's a few people who are more versed at it than I am, and then they might be saying, "Why is this dude bashing our name? We already know all this." But I am a novice at this. This is not my field. So, what books or what tutorials would you suggest, or what websites to learn from?
Okay, so if you want to do your own company, there's a bunch of entrepreneurial books, and I know your podcast is about that. So I guess there's a lot of material being covered in that way. For blockchain in particular, there's a bunch of tutorials. I guess the first thing is to focus like on one blockchain at first, because like doing them all at the same time makes kind of no sense, and you cannot have a focus. So I guess I'm gonna be biased in saying Ethereum, but it's one of the most welcoming communities, let's say. And there's a bunch of tutorials, and the easiest way to go is just to go to ethereum.org, and there's like a learning section, and there's like hundreds of links there. So that's definitely a good point. And there's also another book called Mastering Ethereum, where they go have like a top-down approach, like, okay, this is blockchain, okay, this is how Ethereum is special, this is like what cryptocurrency is, let's see how all of this works. And then they start bottom up, and then they start explaining all of the concepts and everything else. So Mastering Ethereum, I think, is a good one as well.
Yeah. That was such a wonderful thing. Do you have any questions for me? Because I'm out of words with all the questions. You answered most of them like correctly. If you have any questions about Nepal, and by the way, we're doing this Visit Nepal 2020 thing, and our tourism minister has asked us tenderly. See what I did there? To tell everyone out of the country to come visit Nepal in 2020. It's a beautiful country. We've got Mount Everest. We got a lot of flora and fauna. And Buddha was born in Nepal. If I don't say it, the internet community from Nepal is going to kill me. But yeah, there's a lot of things going on, and I hope you can come to Nepal. If you have any questions right now, this is your time to ask a guy who spent most of his life in Nepal. Ask me anything about Nepal.
Well, after this intro, I guess the question would be which part of the year the weather is nice. That's what you said.
Okay,
And
so
that's
it depends on like it depends on if you really like hot weather, temperate weather, or really cold weather. If you like really cold weather, I'd say winter time is the best time to come here, like around December. Don't go out too far up in the hills. It's gonna be like snowy and everything. but then if you stay around 5,000 meters in altitude, you're good. The cold is not that bad cold. It's like the good kind, like the thing that kisses your cheek and goes away. If you wear layers of clothes, you'll be fine. And the people are nice. I would say September and August is the best part. Okay, this is the time when we have this biggest festivals going on, September and October time. This is when you want to go to the hills, and most people are celebrating some herbs and whatnot. If that you're into that kind of a thing, that's when we see all these tourists come in and they're enjoying themselves. And then there's elephants. If you want to ride elephants, we got elephants out on the flats. And then if you want to see like tigers and everything, you can go on these safaris. You can go see rhinos. And then if you want to go to the Annapurna, which is one of the tallest mountains in the world, if you want to go see that, there's the Annapurna circuit. You can like walk around, hike. And then there's Mount Everest, of course, if you want to do that. But that is going to cost you a little bit. And if you ever want to just like say, okay, I just want to come to the valley, go to the big cities and enjoy, I'd say the capital city, Kathmandu, is the best. Uh, it's a mega city. There's about 6 million people, I think. Yeah, 6 million people here. So that's a big city, right? And then there's Pokhara, which is yeah,
Sorry, my audio dropped. Just give me a
yeah, it's okay. Uh,
this.
yeah. Then there's the Pokhara city, which is by a lake, by mountains. It is more peaceful. It's sort of a mini Kathmandu capital city. Then there's and it's going to have an international airport at some point in the by next year. So you can just land there and just chill and never come to the capital city. But I don't tell you to do that. Then there's my favorite city where I'm from. It's where Buddha was born, sort of. It's 18 kilometers from there. They're going to have an international airport too there. It's called Bhairava, and it's really beautiful. It's really hot, even in September and August, but they have the best milkshakes over there. And if you ride for 20 kilometers up north, you can go to the coolest temperatures and the flora and fauna. For every 20 kilometers from north to south, you're going to get a different geographical location. And there's going to be so many rivers here. If you go outside of the capitals, so many rivers. You could just like scoop some water and just drink it. It'd be nice. Tell us something about Serbia, man.
Okay, so we kind of connect Europe with Asia more or less. So there has actually been fought like through history, like a bunch of wars here have been fought because of the geographical location. But it's interesting because you have a bunch of these cultures that passed through and like left a mark. So now, like in retrospect, when you look at it, it's really nice to see like so many cultures and everything else being apparent here. As for what to see, we have like all four seasons, which is kind of nice and getting more and more rare in the world.
Global warming.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I really like, for example. And then for cities to see, I don't know, most people go to Belgrade, which is the capital, which is like this huge city where you have like this huge fort and everything else, and it's really nice. It's not as big as Kathmandu though. It's around 2 million people or so. But still, there's a bunch of people. People are really friendly. It's a really young city, as in a lot of young people live there. So you also have like a bunch of parties and everything else, which is nice. Also, as you mentioned, Buddha, I have to mention Nikola Tesla is also from Serbia. So there's like this really nice museum here as well that's gaining more and more traction, where you can like hold the lamp with no bars at all, and it will light up when they turn on the power. And there's like small lightings actually hitting it while you hold it and stuff like that. So that's an interesting thing. I also really like Novi Sad, which is I think like 80 or 90 kilometers north from Belgrade. It's a totally different pace. It's in this huge valley, which is nice. And then we have like a bunch of fun nature stuff to do at the south, like a lot of mountains, a lot of hiking, a lot of rivers where you can raft, for example, if you like stuff like that. So that,
We have
and then
those too.
yeah, and then of course the food, because we're all here foodies, but if you like meat, more or less, because everything here revolves around meat, more or less. But you can like try a lot of really, really, really good meals based around meat. So that's another thing that I really like. and cheese as well.
Yeah, well, when I was studying in New Orleans, there were a bunch of athletes from Serbia who came. They
Mm-hmm.
were playing basketball. Do they play a lot of
Yeah,
basketball over there? They were
yeah,
playing
yeah.
basketball, and there are a lot of females. They were playing volleyball, and I must say, like all the people from like Serbia, really beautiful, men, women, like really beautiful, I must say. And we treated the athletes with utmost respect in our schools over there. And I must say, like, whenever you have all these cultures mixing in, and Nepal is also in the between like India and China, so you have two different races mixing in, and sometimes it creates so much genealogical diversity as well. And I think that's what you're referring to. And
Hmm.
the trade routes itself, because there were lots of wars fought, there was a lot of peacetime as well, and trade was really flourishing. Um, Thank you so much. We'll
Thank you
talk
as well.
more. We'll talk more, and then hopefully when we meet, I hope to do a Europe tour, and I'll come to Serbia. I have other friends from Austria and other places in Europe, and I'll meet them, and I'll meet you too. For now, we're ending this podcast, and hopefully, if you learned a lot about blockchain, you learned a lot about Tenderly, and if you're in a country where blockchain is allowed and you're allowed to use Ethereum, please use their service. It's for technical and non-technical people. Right now, if you're a developer, their service is really nice. I talked to a lot of friends and I showed them what their concept is, and they really loved it. They couldn't use it here, of course, but they understood the whole concept, and they're really in awe with it. And they were waiting for this podcast to happen to understand who this guy is and why I'm talking him so much. Thank you so much, Bogdan. And if you ever need to come to Nepal, you know who to talk to. And after this podcast, I
Definitely.
hope you make 30 or 40 Nepali friends who can always like invite you over.